The first time he held up his phone and laughed, a part of me wanted to laugh too, because laughter is the social currency in an old room, and because I'd learned early that matching the room's rhythm makes life easier. But the laugh that filled the trailer that day sounded different coming from him. Sharp around the edges, not the warm kind that invites you into the joke. It's sliced. I am a female that works in a primarily male-dominated field. I truly love my job. It's probably the best one I've had by far. I love the puzzles, the smell of diesel at dawn, the way plans on a page become actual structure under the sun. I love the solidarity of people who can read a blueprint like a language. I also know how to zip a wind shell close and keep my chin up when a joke is soft and harmless, and when it isn't. Here's the coworker issue. One of my coworkers found me on a dating app. Well, he said his brother found me and asked him if he worked with me. Due to my specification of the industry I worked in / my location. I wasn't working the day he made this discovery. Upon finding out I was on said dating app, he made it a point to let everyone know I was. I found it odd. Why should he or anyone else care? I then realized it was in a damn she's desperate fashion. Not only is the workplace and field in general male-dominated, but I am more than 20 years younger than the majority of my coworkers, with the exception of the guy who spread the info and a couple others. I didn't care initially. I presumed it would blow over, but it indeed has not. He and a few others bring it up in a mocking or teasing way quite regularly. It really wasn't funny the first time, and it definitely wasn't the second, third, or fourth time. I want to highlight that the intention does not feel playful, but instead is delivered in a very demeaning way. I will occasionally get unsolicited advice on my appearance from the same coworker. That is the piece that keeps replaying in my head. Unsolicited advice. The words tumble into my inbox like leaves in a gutter. The notes about the color of my jacket when I'm out in the field. The helpful suggestion to maybe wear less eye-catching lipstick so clients don't get distracted. There is a presumption there that stings more than the original joke, as if being visible, outside of some old fashion of decorum, is a failing I can fix with a tube of balm or a different blouse. When he first told the room, when he thrust the phone like a prize and announced my profile, it felt like a small, private thing was sanded suddenly into the public. Dating is something most adults do in pockets of time outside the job. It's not a performance to be judged beside the coffee urn. The way he described it, with that particular smirk, that little headshake, and the damn in his voice, made the room tilt. People who cared to laugh did. People who didn't laughed coaxingly into the cadence. There was a sound a little like a shutter closing. At first, I wanted to let the air clear itself. I'd been in rooms where gossip is a sport, and in another week new things would crop up and get more attention. I thought the same here. Let it cycle, and it will go away. But life doesn't always cooperate with hope. The comments kept arriving, smaller and more precise. A throwaway in the lunch line, so when's your wedding? A joke at the end of a meeting. We should all share our secret lives, huh? Hands patted my shoulder in a way that felt like marking territory. The pattern lodged in my bones like a pebble in a shoe. There was a moment of disbelief, and then a slow, gathering anger. Not for show, not an indignant flare in a meeting, but the kind that orders you to keep records and look for witnesses. It's an engineering brain that does this. Perhaps it's because the world I love is tidy in its physics. When people treat private choices as public sport, the mechanisms of respect have been interfered with. You can fix mechanics. You can fix culture if you pay attention and put the right supports in place. I started keeping notes. A line in my phone. Date, time, who was there, what was said. An email forwarded and saved. The printed conversation that had been left on the copier at lunch and the name scrawled in someone else's handwriting. I knew I wasn't the first person to be mocked or folded into an office story, but that wasn't comforting. It only made the problem larger, because then it became about pattern and not a one-off lapse in taste. What surprised me most was not the initial sting, but how quickly certain behaviors became normalized. People who otherwise carry themselves respectfully at work began to feel freer, as if the act of laughing at me immunized them against other forms of judgment. There was a hierarchy that let some things slide when they were harried by tradition. The idea that we've always done it this way is an insidious maintenance manual. It keeps small cruelties from being seen for what they are. I thought about confronting him directly. I practiced a short speech in the mirror, exact and even. I could picture the look on his face. Redirect to joke, then minimize, a deflection so practiced it felt like an old coat pulled on without thought. I didn't want to humiliate him back, because vengeance builds its own architecture of ugliness. I wanted something cleaner, acknowledgement, maybe an apology, a closing of the door on that moment. But when I found him at the whiteboard, marker in hand, drawing the day's plan, and said, quietly, "That was unnecessary," he shrugged and offered the kind of half-apology people give when they don't understand the harm they've caused. "Lighten up. It's all banter." The phrase stung because it assumed my discomfort was a defect in me rather than a signal that the culture had been stretched thin. I tried softer tactics first. I turned jokes into neutral replies, changed the subject, smiled when I could. But each time I laughed, something in me retracted a little. I didn't want to be the person who made the workroom uncomfortable for everyone. I live in a practical world, and the job needs faces that can weather bad days. But I also felt the slow siphon of dignity being drawn away by repeated remarks and the whispering that followed them. Then there was the printed screenshot. It arrived on a gray Tuesday stuck under a stack of thermal receipts on the supply counter. Someone had printed my profile, my picture, my job title, my app bio, and left it where a dozen people would inevitably see it when they reached for tape or bandanas. The act was petty and poisonous at once. Petty because it was small and anonymous. Poisonous because it invited an entire population to glance and judge without context. I remember the paper between my hands. It was light and ordinary and had the power of a weapon. The color in the selfie looked like me, the smile familiar. You don't realize how personal a small photograph can feel until someone circulates it without asking and grins when you look at it. You become, for a moment, the object on which someone performs laughter. It's humiliating in a way that's ancient and intimate. After that, I stopped hoping it would evaporate. The jokes became mind-rehearsed provocations. A story told 3 times isn't a joke anymore. It's a position. He seemed relieved by the attention his little crusade had procured. Others joined in, sometimes because they liked his commentary, sometimes because they didn't want to be the only person silent when the group laughed. That's one of the most dangerous social truths in any workplace. Silence in the face of harm is not neutrality. It's tacit permission. I needed an anchor. I found it in 2 unexpected places. First was an older foreman, call him Miguel, who had been on crews before safety standards tightened and before social media existed. He had seen ways of treating people that were ugly and had decided, quietly, that he didn't want to be that kind of person. One day he pulled me aside and said, "You don't have to put up with our noise. Keep your head down and do your work. But if it keeps up, come tell me." His voice was gravelly and careful, not the performative allyship of someone wanting praise. It was real. The second anchor was myself, which sounds like a small, obvious truth. But there was a moment where I realized I was allowed to prioritize my own boundaries. I had been bending and folding to keep the team comfortable, but that had never been a precondition for my competence. Competence stands on its own. The problem was the environment, not my worth. So I turned the notebook into evidence. I saved texts and screenshots. I documented the printed page and who would have been on shift when it appeared. I sent a concise, unemotional email to HR. I also copied my project manager, because sometimes a note from 2 directions opens doors more efficiently than a single voice. The email was short, dates, facts, and a simple request for a discussion. My hands shook a bit when I hit send. It felt like taking a photograph of a wound before it scabbed, clinical, necessary, honest. The response from HR was prompt and official. They scheduled a meeting to hear my concerns and asked for the documentation I'd compiled. They said they would handle it discreetly. The word discreet felt fragile to me in that moment. It risks meaning, we'll look the other way. But I wanted to believe process could do what courage sometimes alone cannot, translate discomfort into policy. On the morning of the meeting, the whole place seemed louder than usual. I sat with my folder on the conference table and felt the weight of the paper like armor. HR asked clarifying questions and took notes. They didn't flinch at anything I said. They simply cataloged it. I watched Sam in the chair across from me, arms folded, the way someone tightens their jaw when the world has asked for a new version of them. He offered a half phrase, it was a joke, and that had been rehearsed for him. HR listened and then told him exactly what they were there to tell him. That sharing private information to publicly humiliate a coworker was against company policy, and that repeated behavior would have consequences. What followed was not theatrical. There were no dramatic firings. Instead, there was a calibrated set of responses. Sam received a written warning and had to attend training on workplace conduct. The team received a mandatory session on boundaries and respect. HR increased the anonymity options for reporting and clarified the line between banter and harassment. Those are the kinds of corporate corrective measures that can sound flat on the outside and instrumental on the inside, like replacing a bolt that's preventing a structure from shifting. Not everyone loved the outcome. Some grumbled that the company was policing humor, that men and the trade just ribbed one another, and that was that. Others were relieved and, in private, admitted they had felt uncomfortable too, but didn't know how to speak up. The messy truth is always somewhere between the lines. Culture is about both individual acts and the patterns that reward them. For me, the change that mattered most wasn't the formal memo. It was the small recalibration of daily life. People who had been loud about the screenshot grew quieter. Sam avoided the kind of performative banter that had once defined him. He made an awkward attempt at normalcy. Miguel continued to be an anchor in practical ways, recommending me for lead rotations and checking in after rough days. Some colleagues I had expected to show support kept a distance. They were uncomfortable, perhaps, or they feared being pulled into things they'd always accepted. That was a loss I had to accept. The printed profile never stopped my career. In the months that followed, I leaned into competence and to less visible but more lasting measures. I took on a complex scheduling challenge and solved it with clarity. I offered mentorship to a new hire who was nervous and male and didn't know how to ask questions. I proposed a simple ritual on the whiteboard called shout-outs, where each week we listed one thing each person did well. The ritual was small, but it moved the room's gravity away from gossip and toward tangible contributions. There were nights when the whole thing replayed in my head, the phone held up like a prize, the laughter ricocheting, and the shame slipped through in a wave that sifted the memory into smaller pieces. Shame is sticky. It tries to make you feel alone and reflexively wrong. I fought against it by codifying the facts. Here are the dates, the emails, the printed page. I learned to bring witnesses when I could and to speak simply about what I experienced. That voice felt different from a younger voice that would have tried to meet mockery with mockery or let it rattle into resignation. Over time, some of the people who'd laughed came to understand, in small ways, how the culture had bent and needed mending. A man who had once joked about my lipstick came to me and said, "I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. It was simple. It didn't erase the past, but it was a step." Apologies are not a solvent for systemic issues. They are pebbles thrown to begin a ripple. The real work is policy, education, and the slow business of shifting how people choose to talk. I don't pretend everything is fixed. Systems and attitudes take longer than a single season to ossify into something better. There are still comments sometimes, small, thoughtless remarks that need correcting. The trick is to correct them early, and with the steadiness of someone who has seen the pattern and decided it will not define her. I learned to interrupt the first joke, to say, "That's not funny to me," and to move conversation elsewhere. Those small acts are like tightening a bolt before load increases. When someone asks me how it felt to go from being the subject of a joke to someone who filed a formal complaint, I tell them plainly, it felt like stepping out from a shadow. It felt necessary and a little brittle, like tuning a machine that had been humming incorrectly for years. It cost me social comfort in some settings, yes. But it also reclaimed the space where my work and my personhood could coexist without being weaponized for entertainment. The best part, in a quiet way, is that the job still feels like the best one I've ever had. The sun still hits a freshly set beam at the same angle. The math still checks out. The satisfaction of seeing a plan hold under its own weight is still undescribably good. The difference is that now the room around me, imperfect, human, changeable, has a line defined in it that friends and quiet allies respect. The jokes have to be kinder or they don't get laughs. The culture is not perfect, but it's less poisonous. It is, if anything, learning to be kinder in the old language of hard hats and schedules. I tell this story not because I want sympathy, but because there is a lesson in the small ledger I kept. When private life becomes public ridicule, when a person uses social currency to make someone smaller, you can document it, speak up, and ask for the structures you work within to protect dignity. It will not always be easy. It will not always be neat. But dignity, like a well-placed bolt, holds the structure together and keeps it standing in wind and rain. And sometimes, when I walk out at the end of a long day and my helmet is warm in my hand and the site smells of dust and sun, a new rookie will drop a post-it in the shoutouts column. "Thanks for showing me the splice technique today. Saved us time." I pin it up and feel a warmth that's not about approval, but about belonging. That's all I asked for in the end. To belong, not be the thing people laugh at on someone else's phone.